Michelle was very sad. She thought that she had no hope left, that her life was empty and silent. She believed that her desire to achieve was gone, because it had no support, that friendship had escaped her, that love.
You should take some medicine.
Her aunt suggested after Michelle sighed deeply many times during tea.
Not that medicine. Any other kind, but not that one.
Michelle said, not really paying attention. No, she wasn't sick in her body, her sadness was deeper, like a sickness of the heart, very serious, and getting worse, that couldn't be fixed by reading her favorite thinkers or even by repeating her grandmother's advice, if you can't get what you want, be happy with what you have. But she couldn't point to one big reason for her sadness. It was true that her long book, which she had worked on all winter, was not published, but since she hadn't expected it to be, that didn't make her sadder. Also, she had lost some money and couldn't go on a trip or buy a new dress for spring, but she was able to think about higher things than just material losses. Then, there was Reverend Luke Graham, but what Luke Graham did or said meant nothing, absolutely nothing, to her. So Michelle was very upset and told her room that she couldn't bear it, she had to do something. That's when she got a great idea, she would write a funny story. The idea of writing something funny made her happy. She had heard that funny people are often very sad, and that being very unhappy helps to see the funny side of life. She decided to try it, now was the time to write something funny. The material was ready in her mind, the boring and narrow-mindedness of the villagers, the self-importance, the vanity, the pompous attitude of Luke Graham. What more could a writer of humor want? Yes, she would write. Ideas and words came quickly, her writing was passionate and unstoppable. She felt excited, happy, and lifted in spirit, which is what writers often feel when they create something new. Then, before her ideas could become less exciting, she sent the story to the first magazine on her list that started with A. She liked to send her stories in alphabetical order, though sometimes she started from Z to be fair. 2 weeks later, Michelle decided that even if her life was going to be empty and silent, she would still try to make others happy. She would rise above her sadness, just as flowers push through the dark soil to bring beauty and scent to those passing by. So, she changed her hairstyle and ordered a simple blue dress from a shop, made of a fabric that made a whispering sound. Then, one day, she casually went to the post office and got a letter from the magazine that started with A. She felt a chill. That funny story, could it mean it was too terrible to think about? She took a shortcut through the orchard, and as she walked, she opened the letter a bit and looked inside. Yes, there was a light blue note inside. She leaned against a tree to think. It's true that you should always be ready for surprises. Michelle had sent out many stories, full of hope, but how could she have guessed that this one, sent out of habit, would be accepted and paid for? She was very upset with the magazine editor. She felt tricked because he had always sent back her stories before, but now he had kept one without warning. It took her a while to calm down enough to read the letter from the editor. It said,
"Dear Madam, we really like your story about village life. It shows a true feeling for the simple goodness of people. We're sending you a check as a thank you. Very truly yours, the editor of A magazine."
Michelle sat down, feeling weak. A true and kind story, a generous view. She laughed weakly. The editor was joking with her. He understood the humor in her story and showed it by responding in a funny way. She looked at the letter again and the check with mixed feelings. Maybe the story wasn't so bad after all. She let herself remember how funny it was, how cleverly it showed the silly and surprising sides of things, how full of jokes and smart observations it was, all about her family and friends. Michelle thought about returning the check and asking for her story back, but, remembering that advice is useful for more than just marriage and decisions about life, she didn't. She decided to forget about her story. She thought that probably no one in her village would read it during her family's lifetime, and even if they did, the villagers probably wouldn't realize it was about them. They didn't read much, and few of them knew about the magazine that started with A. Even Luke Graham didn't care much for magazines. Besides, if necessary, she could distract him. So, Michelle went on a trip because she needed it for her health. The doctor didn't know what was wrong with her, but she thought it was because of the stress from the magazine. When Michelle came back to her village, feeling better, she avoided looking at magazines and was happy to talk to someone she knew on the train, to avoid being alone.
How silly of me.
The person exclaimed with a bright smile, barely pausing to catch her breath.
In my happiness to see you, I almost forgot. What a sweet and smart story.
She continued, her voice filled with admiration.
And to think you got published in a magazine.
She shook her head in disbelief, genuinely impressed by Michelle's achievement.
I was so surprised when Mr. Ferguson brought the magazine home,
she said, recalling the moment they discovered Michelle's story in the magazine.
Those funny people from our village.
She laughed, referring to the characters in Michelle's story that were inspired by their own villagers.
I just had to send them copies right away.
The villagers seemed to have started distributing copies of the magazine.
Yes, Porter, that too.
She suddenly said, briefly turning her attention to someone else, likely a train porter handling luggage or tickets.
Please visit me soon. Dear, really do. See you again soon.
With these final words, they quickly wrapped up the conversation, extending a warm invitation to Michelle before parting ways. Michelle bought the newest issue of the magazine that started with A. She looked at the table of contents anxiously, then dropped the magazine. Her funny story had been shared with everyone. She sat back and looked out at the landscape, thinking that even the most serious and respectable people can seem silly if you look at them in a certain way, but it's not usually a friend's job to show that silly side. Well, her family would forgive her eventually. Families have to forgive. It was too bad Luke Graham wasn't family.
One thing, now I know how much Mrs. Ferguson didn't like me winning the club presidency. 6 copies.
Michelle said out loud as she saw the church in her village. Her Uncle Joe met her and kissed her for the first time since she had grown up. Despite not liking tobacco, Michelle accepted his kiss kindly.
Did you see how many people were at the station, so you had to stop and say hi to get through?
Uncle Joe asked as they drove home. Michelle thought they were there to see the train.
Nope.
Uncle Joe said.
Trains are too common now. They were there because of you.
Me?
Michelle was worried and pretended to dodge something thrown at her.
Yes, and there will be a lot of family at the house waiting for you.
Why? What? Look here, Uncle Joe. There's no need to make a big deal about a little.
Making a big deal? Maybe some would think so, but we're very proud to have a talented writer in the family like a famous author.
Michelle looked at Uncle Joe, wondering if he was making fun of her. But no, he was just happy to mention he knew of some famous writers, showing he was proud of her without understanding much about writing. For once, Michelle didn't know what to say. but Uncle Joe liked to talk when he got going. He looked at Michelle and said,
Yes, your story is out and your family is very happy with you. I wish your dad could have seen this day.
Ah.
Michelle held on tightly to the buggy.
But I guess you'll have to write another one soon. Some are jealous because they weren't in it.
Uncle Joe continued.
I told them you couldn't include everyone or it would be too long. Your Aunt Lucy is very happy.
Oh.
Said Michelle.
Yes, she loves the drawing of her trying to save medicine and getting sick, which makes her laugh. She also likes how I look with a beard in the drawing, even though I can't grow one well. She's always wanted me to have a beard.
Uncle Joe then said he was proud to be a main character in the story and warned Michelle that everyone was curious about the preacher since they couldn't figure out who he was based on. Michelle, feeling overwhelmed but grateful, promised to keep it a secret. When Michelle met her family, she was more loving and interested in them than usual, which made them suspicious because she didn't talk about her story, even though they wanted to know about it. After everyone left, Michelle went to read her story again and saw the Reverend Graham coming. She pretended to be interested in the apples as he approached. As Reverend Graham expressed his admiration for the story, Michelle bit her lip to keep from giggling.
You've brought the whole village together, Michelle, in ways you might not have expected.
He said earnestly.
Indeed.
Michelle thought.
If they only knew the real inspiration behind it.
The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to pen a satire, she'd become the village's accidental unifier.
Vocabulary words and phrases with easy-to-understand definitions. After learning these new words, read the story again. Try saying the words out loud as you read. This will help you remember them better. Unstoppable, adjective. Couldn't stop, kept going. Example, the runner was unstoppable, she kept going even when she was tired. Sent out, phrasal verb. Mailed. Example, I sent out the birthday invitations yesterday. In alphabetical order, phrase. A, B, C order. Example, the books are arranged in alphabetical order on the shelf. Light blue note, phrase. Pale blue piece of paper. Example, there was a light blue note on the table. Leaned against, phrasal verb. Put her back against. Example, she leaned against the wall and waited. Unimpressed, adjective. Not very interested. Example, the child was unimpressed by the new toy. Crafty, adjective. Tricky. Example, the fox used a crafty trick to steal the rabbit's lunch. Distract, verb. Take someone's attention away. Example, the dog barked to distract the thief. Porter, noun. Someone who helps with luggage at a train station. Example, the porter helped me carry my suitcase. Satire, noun. A funny story that makes fun of something. Example, the cartoon was a satire of political corruption.
Loved the story and learned new words? Share it with your friends and subscribe for more stories to keep improving your English. Check out the next recommended video or playlist on the screen. See you again soon.